Aside from a passion for waistcoats of the same liturgical purple oft sported by the Archbishop of Canterbury, a pleasing shade for a gentleman of my years and colouring, I am not a religious man. This should surprise no one. The Church looks askance at a confirmed bachelor unless he is vowed to a life of quiet celibacy and good works. And while I am the most confirmed of bachelors, quiet and celibate, I am not. The only work I care to contemplate involves gallo-glass first air Ned Winter, and horizontal surfaces, where we might celebrate our carnal urges with enthusiasm and a great deal of noise. My chief complaint, though, is that the good book has some distressing, wrong-headed ideas about the culpability of children when it comes to the sins of their fathers. With a father like mine, the injustice fair takes the breath away. I was 30 when I learned that while Richard Lancaster, deceased, may have been my mother's husband, her country squire, and a lover of the music hall, the one thing he had never been was my father. He stood Moses for me, and, I am told, said not one word of blame to his wife. But I was not of his begetting. I discovered this in Abydos, Egypt, in the early days of 1901. The man I had supposed was my half-cousin John, first heir of Minor House Stravagor, my house, tried to kill me. John, it turned out, was not any sort of cousin at all, but the elder half-brother determined to get rid of me before our father, the head of our house, the Stravagor, could disinherit him and put me in his place. He failed, and the Stravagor removed him from the succession, permanently. John lies now under a shady palm in the Egyptian desert near Abydos, and I, Raphael James Lancaster, better known as Rafe, was proclaimed first heir. A tale with all the barbaric bloodthirstiness of the Old Testament. But that's the Britannic Imperium for you. Ruthlessness is the Imperium's very lifeblood, bred into the flesh and bone of every house within it, from the most powerful of the convocation houses to the smallest, most insignificant of the minor houses, their satellite allies. Assassination has been the tool of choice for generations of houses jockeying for power and position, all champing at the bit to govern the Imperium. It's the tradition, you see, and we British are very fond of traditions. It makes for an exhilarating social and political system where the Imperium's great men won't even go to the lavatory unless escorted by guards so well armed they could start their own war. The Imperium steamed on in this merry, sanguinary way, unchallenged for centuries, until Queen Victoria applied the brakes. With her liking for good order and unamused by the constant, messy internecine war between the houses, she threatened to demote any house that used assassination. That brought the Imperium's favourite tradition to a juddering, steam-belching halt. She took umbrage when my grandfather was killed 8 years ago, Ned had told me one night in Abydos, the evening of John's funeral, when I was still reeling from my sudden elevation. We had talked a great deal about politics as Ned tried to reconcile me to my doom. I was with Flinders Petrie at Luxor, but with my father taking over the house, I came home. Papa told me the Queen's temper tantrum blew out half the windows in Windsor. The Stravagor mentioned it when I left the Aero Corps over a year previously. I remember the Stravagor telling me those house princeps she gave a talking to about it are still trembling at the knees and wiping shaking hands across their troubled brows. Even with me draped over him in our favourite sandy hollow out in the desert, the stars filling the skies with incandescent glory, Ned had shrugged, more cynical than usual. I don't think so. All that's changed is the houses are more circumspect. They at least try to make their assassinations look like accidents. His wife had been killed in such an accident, leaving his sons motherless. I tightened my arms around him and let the talk drift into silence. In comparison, my concerns were mere pinpricks. After a respectful interval, I offered what comfort I could, tracing the scars left on his chest from the same accident with fingers and tongue, until he forgot politics, and my worries about my clouded future slipped from my mind. For a little while. That so-called accident, engineered House Galloglass suspected by fellow Convocation House Panifex, proved the Stravagor wasn't alone in his devotion to preserving and furthering the power and influence of his house by any means necessary.